In the last lesson, we introduced forms and controls, form elements, and all the elements within a form that can accept data from the user, collectively called controls. But we only looked at one control, the input element. In this session, we'll look at some other elements that fall into the control category: button, select, option, OPTGROUP, and label. We also explore the DOM interfaces some more, and we'll have some fun with the down-to-earth cafe as we get a little creative. The button element. This control element is the same as input elements that render as buttons, except this element can have content. The syntax: start tag, button, and possibly some attributes, and the content and an end tag. Both the start tag and the end tag are required. Now, the content can be text or an image, and we'll have an example shortly. Useful attributes for button: ID, class, style, and title as before. Type. What type of button is this? One of submit. Clicking this button will submit the form. Reset. Clicking this button will reset the form. And button. Clicking this button has no implicit actions, so we'll probably have to have an event handler. A name for sending to the CGI, and the value for sending to the CGI. Here's an example. Button, type equals submit, value equals submitted, name equals yoo-hoo. Now the content is text, click to apply, followed by an image, which in this case is a logo, and then end button, and it might display this way. Note that the image is stretched to accommodate the text. So you could use this instead of an input element of type equals submit or type equals image. The select element. This element allows us to build a list for the user to choose from. This is user-friendly and also restricts data that might be sent down the line. Visually, it generates what is commonly called a list box or drop-down box. The syntax: select start tag, possibly some attributes, and then content, and then an end tag. And the start tag and the end tag are required. The content is 0 or more option elements and or OPTGROUP elements. Come to those shortly. Useful attributes for select: ID, class, style, and title as before. Name for sending to the CGI. Multiple. This is a Boolean. It allows choosing multiple items from the list. And size, which is a number indicating how many options should be displayed on the screen. If it's coded, display that many items. If it's not coded, the default is 4 if multiple is specified, but 1 if multiple is not specified. A possible event handler to provide: onClick. Process the selection of a nested option element. Example a little later on. Here's an example structurally of what we're talking about. We have a select element, and within that we have 4 option elements. Clearly, we need to understand the option element to get the whole impact of the select element. The option element. Each option element represents one entry in a select element. Together, these elements display as a list box. The syntax: option, possibly some attributes, and the content, which is normally text, and the end tag. The start tag is required, the end tag is optional, but we recommend it. Useful attributes for option as before: ID, class, style, title. Disabled is a Boolean attribute. It says this option is not available. Might be useful for turning on and off in a script. Label is a visible label for this option. We'll talk about that shortly. Selected is also Boolean. If it's present, this item has been selected. And value, and this is the value to send to the CGI under the name of the containing select. We got some notes to go over. First, Name is not an attribute for an option element. The selected options are sent under the name of the owning select. If label is specified, that is what is displayed in the list. If label is not specified, the content is displayed. An exception is Firefox never displays the label value. This is likely an error or bug, but to ensure consistent appearance across browsers, I recommend you always code a content and omit the label attribute. If value is not coded, the text value, the content of the element, is used. Generally, I recommend coding content and no value. However, there may be times when you can use the content to describe the choice more completely to the user, and then use the value to send an internal code or abbreviation for the CGI to handle. For example, option value equals AR, and then our content is arbitration rules. So in this case, the user will see arbitration rules in the list, but the CGI will see the code AR. Possible event handler to provide? None. Work is usually done at the containing select level. So here's an example. Here's some code to test out various options. H1, here is a form using select controls. H2, bodily functions. Form. Action equals CGIs/simple underscore CGI underscore get.php. Method equals get. Paragraph. Class equals dot. Select choices as desired. Dot, dot, dot. Couple of new lines. And then we have our select elements with their nested options. So select name equals BF underscore 1, size equals 1, option laugh, option guffaw, option snicker, option cough, option chuckle. And then select name equals BF underscore 2, option wave at the folks, option walk, option fall, option float, option stall. And then select name equals BF underscore 3, size equals 1, multiple, option another laugh, another guffaw, another snicker, another cough, another chuckle, and select name equals BF4, multiple, option shave again, option cake stalk, option commitment stall, option boat float, option false fantasy. And finally, select name equals agony, size equals 3, option shaving nick, option trip up, option dive to depression, option boat sink, option float drink, and select. Then submit type of input, name sub1, end paragraph, end form. Note the various combinations of size and multiple. The form displays this way in Firefox and in Chrome, and this way in Edge, and here in Opera, and in the UC browser. Notes: the downward and upward pointing carets indicate you can scroll the list up and down. Notice the number of lines that are shown for each list. This is a function of the size and multiple attributes. Notice that the third list, another laugh, is not scrollable in Firefox or Edge. This is another bug. To avoid this, consider coding size equals greater than 1 whenever you also have multiple. The OPTGROUP element. This element allows you to visually clump related options together. It also allows you to break up long lists of choices under a single select element. The syntax: OPTGROUP, start tag, possibly some attributes. Your content is 0 or more option elements, and an end tag. The start tag is required, but the end tag is optional, but recommended. Useful attributes for OPTGROUP: ID, class, style, and title, of course, and label, what displays in the list box, and this is required. Disabled, a Boolean option that says no options in this OPTGROUP are available, and of course you can change that in a script. Useful event handlers for OPTGROUP: none. work is generally done at the containing select level. Example. Here's a variation on our previous example, combining all the select statements using OPTGROUP. So we have our form and our paragraph and our select. And the select has, here's an OPTGROUP called bodily functions. Notice the label, and it's our first group that we had under select before. Our second OPTGROUP is called out of body functions. Same option list we had in our second select group. The next OPTGROUP label is more body functions, and the options are as we had in the third select group. The next OPTGROUP is called risky body functions, and the same options as we had in our fourth select group. And finally, the OPTGROUP called dangerous body functions, and the last element that we had under select. Closed OPTGROUP, closed select. And all the browsers display this way. And when the downward pointing caret is clicked, you see this. Select elements, along with option and possibly OPTGROUP elements, seem most useful to present the user with a list of choices that are logically related or grouped, such as countries or languages, states or cities, products or processes, and so on. This can also eliminate some validation tests. The user can only enter values from a specific list, so you don't need to examine the value of the selected choice in JavaScript code. The label element. So far, we have shown input and select controls as embedded in paragraphs. In fact, they can be standalone and use label elements for the descriptive text. Labels can have their own style attributes and may be rendered in special ways by browsers. Note, this is the label element, not the label attribute as seen in option and OPTGROUP elements. So syntax, label, possibly with some attributes, the text content, and the end tag. The start tag and the end tag are both required. The text content may include the element that the label is for. Useful attributes for label, ID, class, style, title, as in previous elements. 4. Identify the control the label is tied to. This points to the ID value of the related control, needed if the label does not include the element as its content. Useful event handlers. None. However, if the label is clicked, for example, any on-click event handler for the label will get control, followed by any on-click event handler for the related control. So double reactions, so to speak. Here are some examples. With a control embedded in a label, so we have label, family name, and then inside of that an input element, and then the end label, and it displays this way. An example of control outside its label. So here's a control, an input type text, and then the label has a 4 equals, and it's 4 equals confirm, which matches the ID. And then the text of the label. And that displays this way. And here's an example of multiple labels for a single control. So we start with a label. It's got a 4 pointing to an ID of a checkbox, and an on-click event handler just to demonstrate. And the text is label before. And then there's the related element, the input type equals checkbox, ID equals CBox, and then it's got its own on-click event, alert checkbox. And then a separate label, same 4 equals, label afterwards, displays this way. And here's a brief demo of how the event handlers for the above labels work. Let's take a look at how this label clicking and event handling works. Over here, if I click on label before, it raises the label on-click event, and when I say OK, it raises the checkbox on-click event, and the checkbox is checked. If I click on the label afterwards, it just raises the checkbox because there is no on-click event for the label, and the checkbox is unchecked. The case for label elements. I used to be a big fan of labels, now I'm not so enamored. One small benefit seems to be if the user clicks a label, for example for a checkbox type control as we demonstrated, the checkbox itself is clicked. If the user clicks a label for a text type control, the text is highlighted as if it had been selected. The standard points out that this can be helpful for people with limited motor skills because it enlarges the area that is sensitive to a click. And the content of a label ties to a control, so browsers that read pages to vision-impaired users might make contents more easily understandable. Also, as we demonstrated, it's possible to have multiple labels tied to a single control element. Not sure how useful that might be, but my students often find new and creative uses for features of HTML and CSS that I miss. DOM for select. In addition to the commonly available DOM properties and methods, the select element has one interesting property and 4 additional methods. The selected index property is an integer value indicating which option in the list is currently selected. If no option is selected, the value of selected index is -1. The first element in the list is number 0. The focus method sets the focus to an element so that keystrokes and mouse clicks are sent to that element. The blur method removes the focus away from an element. The remove (n) method removes the nth option from the list. And the add new option, before option inserts a new option element before the element specified in the second operand. If the second operand is null, that is not specified, append new option to the current list. Of course, remove and add can be accomplished using other methods such as removeChild and appendChild, as discussed earlier. Working with select. Suppose a bistro wanted to web-enable its order-taking process and give its waiters handheld browsers. The order page might have a select element for each part of the meal and a single place to enter the items ordered. In our simple example, we show 3 collections: appetizers, entrees, and desserts, and a select element for holding the list of ordered items, like this. As the customers give their orders, the waiter clicks on the items in the top boxes and they get copied into the bottom box. After taking an order, the waiter might see something like this. When all the orders are placed, press the Submit Order button and the results are sent to the host, the server. The server could then send the order to the kitchen and create an itemized bill for the customer. But let's start with the basics. First, we create our 3 menu input select elements along with their nested option elements. So we begin with the paragraph and a space and a new line just to give us some spacing on the window, on the screen. Appetizer, and select ID as appetizer, size equals 5, and then 5 options: fresh dirt, cattails, pond scum salad, soap scum salad, and chocolate mousse. End a select in a couple of spaces, and then our entree. We label it with ENTR ampersand EACUTE semicolon E. This is a character entity reference for an E with an accent over it, so it shows as entree. Anyway, select ID equals entree, and then we have 5 choices: badger fillet, marinated marmot, fricasseed crow, pebble surprise, and chocolate mousse. Guess you could have that for your entree. And select in a couple of spaces, and then dessert, and a select with an ID dessert and size equals 5, and our dessert options: chilled milkweed, assorted plankton, selection of insects, gobs of wax, and chocolate mousse. Yummy. Some notes. Observe these are all contained in a single paragraph. And for the middle select, as I pointed out, we have that character entity reference to get the E with an accent over it. And this much of the HTML displays this way. The fonts labeling the list boxes and the contents of the list boxes appear different. I'm going to start a style sheet for this page. Let me call it selectstyles.css, and I'll include 2 entries to start. H1, color red, font size 16 point. It's because I know I'll want my heading to be red with a little larger font size. Then I set the font for P and option elements to be monospace 12 point bold. And then I add a link to the style sheet in the head as follows. Link rel equals style sheet, href equals selectstyles.css, type equals text/css. And that results in a display like this. But wait, our original layout had the labels at the top of the boxes. Well, we could build a style class that would move the label in front of each box at the top, maybe like this, dot front label, position relative, top -5m. So we start position normally and go up 5 letter M's. And then we put the labels for the boxes inside a span with this class. So span class equal front label for appetizer and entree and dessert, which now displays this way. Much better. Now, let's add the page heading and instruction before these select groups, giving this much. So we have our body, H1, welcome to the down-to-earth bistro. Form, action equals, quote, quote, for now. Method equals get. On submit equals, quote, quote, for now. And on reset equals, quote, quote. We'll pick these up later. And then a paragraph with our instruction. Click on an item to add to the order. And then a new line in the end paragraph. So now we have our selects, but the label is prefixed by our new class. So then we end up with our progress like this. So we left action as quote, quote. Our intent is to use a function for processing it first, but we'll use method equals get in any case. Also on the form, we set on submit and on reset as blank, and we'll get back to that when we create code. But for now, our next piece is to construct the select element that will hold the orders. So we introduce a paragraph for some spacing, and then an instruction in a paragraph. Click on an item to delete from the order. A couple of new lines, and then we label it with the current order and select name equals order, ID equals order, multiple, size equals 15. And 3 opt groups, 1 for each of the types of entries, appetizers, entrees, and desserts. And then some spacing, and finally our buttons, our submit button and our reset button. And then the end of form. The first paragraph and the various BR elements are there just for spacing and visual separation. In the select element, we have 3 empty opt-grouped elements. As options are selected from the top 3 list boxes, they will be copied down into the appropriate group. Call this the order select element. Once an option is in the order select element, it can be removed by clicking on it after we add some code. We've added submit and reset buttons to complete the form, and we now have this visually. So we're complete on the HTML, except we need to add code to make the interactive parts work. So let's consider the code. When the user clicks on an option in any of the top 3 boxes, that option must be copied down to the correct opt group in the order select element. Recall that in an event handler, you can reference the element itself with the reserved word this. You need to know a select element has an implicit array consisting of all the options under it. So you can code this dot options and then put a subscript into the brackets to reference the individual options. And clicking on an option raises the onClick event in the owning select, setting the selected index property to indicate which option was selected. To grab the text content of the selected option element, we need to get the first child and get the text substring. I choose 0 through 20 because that handles all the cases here. And place this text into a variable. Call it food. So here we have onClick equals food equals this dot options bracket this dot selected index close bracket dot first child dot substring data 0, 20. Wow! Then we invoke a function, call it entadd, whose job it is to add the selected option to the correct op group in the order select. You invoke entadd passing the category of food this belongs to, that is, appetizer, entree, or dessert, and the actual text value of the selected option. So, onClick food equals, and we have that string we just built, entadd, and in parentheses, in this case, I started out with, quote, APPT, so that'll be my flag that's the appetizer opt group, and then food, the variable we just set. To put this in context, here are the 3 list boxes with this code added. So now we've got span, class equals front label for the appetizer, and select ID as appetizer onClick, and then we've added that code. And similarly for the entree onClick, and you'll notice the first operand passed to entadd as ENTR for entree. And then for dessert, entadd passes DESS for dessert. So those are the pieces of code that invoke our functions. So the food type codes apt, enter, and des are the same as the ID values for the opt group elements in the order select element. Aha! So the entadd function gets 2 arguments and has to add a new option element to the correct opt group in the order select. We figured this out. Function entadd ftype, food, and in braces addEnt equals document.create element option, so we create a brand new option element, and then we create a text node for that, which is the value that was passed to us in the second argument, the food, and then we append that text to the new option element, and now addEnt is complete, and we get element by ftype, get element by ID ftype, that is the entree type, the group ID, and append child of the newly created option with the text. That creates an option element, creates the text node for the option element using the passed text, appends the text node to the new option element, and appends the resulting option element to the opt group indicated in the first argument. When the user clicks on an option in the order select element, the selected option must be removed. On click of any option at the select level returns the selected index property, and you simply invoke the remove function. OnClick equals this dot remove parenthesis this dot selected index. Now consider the onSubmit event handler for our form. I created 2 versions for this. First, I use a function to generate a pop-up window containing a list of ordered items, and I call this function showBill. And the form statement then looks like this: form action equals quote quote method equals get, onSubmit equals return showBill, and we'll look at the code shortly. This version, of course, works if you're not yet set up to run CGIs on the server. This one runs from your HTML page. The alternative, I used a PHP CGI named generatebill.php, and I have to mark each option in the order select element as selected so that its value gets passed to the CGI. So in this case, our form statement has an action of CGIs/generateBill.php, still with method equals get, and then on submit, I'm going to step through all of the elements in our order select element and mark them as selected. And this version is designed to be run from your server. In any case, the onSubmit event handler has to go through all the entries in the order select element and create a page containing these entries. Now for the local handling routine, I wrote the function showBill as follows. Function showBill is invoked with no arguments. We open a new window and establish a document stream in that window. We get the length of the order select element, that is, how many options have been selected. And then I create an HTML and a head and a meta with a title and a link to the style sheet, and that's the end of my head. And then body, paragraph, here is your order. And now a paragraph, in this paragraph, I'm going to step through all the elements in the order select element and extract the value, that is the text. And I'm going to write that out, followed by a BR element. And then end of paragraph, end of body, end of HTML. Close the document stream, return false. Now, the return false is what keeps the CGI from being invoked, since we have no action specified. The alternative CGI, generateBill.php, accomplishes a similar task from your server, and it's discussed in the advanced course. Finally, consider the onReset event handler for the form. It has to step through all the option elements contained within the order select element, deleting each one. So here we have onReset equals, and again we step through all the elements and we remove the element as we come to each one. So walking through the logic, focus on the order select element, the one that has ID equals order. Get the length, that is the number of elements nested within the select element, and then step through the logic associated with the for statement, starting with the last element, as long as there is at least one element, decreasing the subscript by one for each iteration. The logic being remove the kth element. Now, the full code for both the local and remote web page versions are found as dtecafe-local.html and dtecafe-remote.html, respectively, in your lab files. DTE for down to earth. And the generated build.php is found in the CGI's directory, and it was uploaded to your server when you did the lab setup. Let's look at the whole HTML document to put things in perspective, and then we'll do a demo of this form. So here's our page all in one view. We have our doc type HTML, a copyright statement, and our HTML element. Within that we have our head element, which contains a link element pointing to our style sheet, and a title element, cafe order. Then our script element starts out defining 3 variables, and then it contains our function showBill, which we've talked about. And then the function ent_add, which adds an entry to the order select element, and that's the end of our script and the end of our head. In the body element, we have an H1, welcome to the down-to-earth bistro, and that will display this way. And here's our form. Action equals quote quote, method equals get, on submit equals return showBill, and on reset, the logic we've already talked about to remove all of the elements from the order select element. Then click on an item to add to the order and a BR element for a new line, and that displays this way. Then another blank line and our 3 elements from the to order from: the appetizer, the entree, the dessert. and those show on the screen this way. Then another blank line. Click on an item to delete from the order. And here is our order select element, and it's got the 3 empty opt groups. And that's all for that, and then some spacing and our submit and reset buttons, end of form, end of body. Now let's demonstrate how this works. If I click on, say, cattails, that's an on-click event for that first element, and you'll notice it gets copied down into the order select element, and that's because of the ent_add function being invoked. And of course I can do multiple of these, and then I'll have some entrees and maybe a dessert. Now notice the injunction to click on an item to delete from the order. If I do this, then it just takes it right away. And that's because of the code where we said on click this dot remove this dot selected index. Finally, if I take the cancel order button, it deletes everything in the order select element. And that's because of our on reset code in the form. And the on reset deletes all the items in the order select element. In this session, we've explored these control elements: button, select, option, opt group, and label, including how different browsers render various versions of select, option, and opt group elements. We discovered new features of the DOM for select elements: selected index property, focus method, blur method, remove method, and add method. In the next session, we look at 3 more control elements: text area, field set, and legend. See you there.